By the end of this video, you'll know enough modeling techniques to make this scene right here. So let's get started. I'm using Blender version 3.4.1, but everything I show will work in most versions. And if you're a complete beginner and you don't know how to move around in Blender, then you should probably watch this video first. I also have a shortcut list that you can get for free, so you don't have to memorize everything. So before we get started with modeling, I just want to change some of the settings. First thing I want to do is select this cube in the outliner and just click and drag it to remove it from this collection, so we can then press this check mark and hide the camera in the light. Then I'll change the shading by going up here and pressing this arrow, and I want to turn on cavity and set that to both. The edges are a little easier to see now. This is optional, but I also like to add a matte cap, so you can press the matte cap button, click this icon, and this is the one that I like to use. You don't have to use it if you don't want to, but I like the way it looks. I also want to turn on one of these gizmos. I like to have the move gizmo on all the time. And let's also go to Edit at the top, Preferences, and then under Add-ons, search for Loop Tools. And just make sure this is checked because we'll be using it a little in this video. I'm not using any other add-ons in this video, but other ones that you can check out that are good for beginners is one called Modifier Tools, Extra Mesh and Curve Objects, the Bool tool, and Auto Mirror. And you don't have to download these or anything. They come pre-packaged with Blender. You just have to turn them on. And while we're in here, let's go to System. And if you haven't already, turn your undo steps all the way up. And this will make it so you can hit Control-Z more times. And if you don't want to set these every time, you can save your preferences right here. So to get started with modeling, you need to know that there's a difference between object mode and edit mode. So right now we're in object mode, and you can tell because this says object mode up here. And this is what the whole last video is about. You can hit G to move objects, S to scale them, and R to rotate, but you can't actually edit individual points to kind of change the shape of this cube. That's what edit mode is for, and you can go into edit mode by clicking this button up here and selecting edit mode. You can also hit Tab to toggle between object mode and edit mode. So back in object mode, if I select this and hit Shift D to duplicate and just move it off to the side, and then hit Tab, I'll go into edit mode with this object right here. And if we try to select this cube, we can't because we only had this one selected when we went into edit mode. So if we go back into object mode, we can actually edit both of these at the same time, but you have to select both of them and then go into edit mode. And now, even though they're two separate objects, we can actually edit both of them. So I'll just select this one and hit X to delete it. So let's select this one and hit Tab to go into edit mode. And when you're in here, you can select individual vertices like this. And just like in object mode, you can hit G to move them around when they're selected. And if you have more than one selected, you can also scale them with S and rotate with R. But it's not just vertices that you have control over. If you come up here, we also have edge select mode and face select mode. And you can switch between these with 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard. So in edge select mode, you're basically selecting points 2 at a time. That's what these lines are right here. And in face select mode, you're selecting these flat sides of the cube. And depending on what mode you're in, you'll have access to different options. That's what these menus right here are for. So we have vertex, edge, and face menus. And you can also use the shortcut Control V, Control E, and Control F to access those menus. I'm not going to talk about all of these options, but if you want to explore and see all of the different things you can do, then definitely check out these menus. You might have also noticed that we have a lot more tools now that we're in edit mode. So you can hover over them to see what they're called, and it also tells you the shortcut, which is nice. And any of the tools that have the little arrow in the corner means that you can click and hold and access some other tools. If you hover over the edge, you can also click and drag it and pull it out, so we can see the names more clearly. And if you don't see this tool panel at all, just hit T on your keyboard, and that's how you open and close it. Next, I'll talk about what these tools do, and I'll also show some common mesh operations. I'm going to run through them quickly, and I'll come back to some of them later to explain with more detail. So let's talk about extruding. You want to be in face select mode for this, and we can just select the top face here and press E to extrude, like that. And then you can scale it, move it around, rotate it, whatever you want. And you can actually make a whole lot of things with just extruding and scaling. But you can extrude from any face to create some, complex shapes like this. But I'll just hit Control Z to go back. And if you want to practice with this, you can try making something like a vase or a cup or like a flower pot or something like that. You can just hit E to extrude, S to scale, E again, E, S to scale, E. And if you hit E and don't start moving it like this, you can hit S immediately and it will start scaling before moving it like that, and it will kind of just make the face smaller like that. So you can pull it in and then hit E again to go down. If you don't want to use the shortcut, we also have this tool over here, and this is going to work pretty much the same. You can just select faces and then pull on this little tool right there, and it will extrude for you. And if you want to switch back to the selection right here, you can hit W, and that's the shortcut for that. So I'll hit tab to go back into object mode, and I'll just pull this off to the side, and I'll add in a new shape with Shift A. Under mesh, I'll just add in a cube. Then we can hit tab to go back into edit mode, and let's talk about beveling. So beveling, you can also bevel faces with Control B like that, and it's going to bevel all of the edges that are attached to that face. So if we hit Control Z and go back into edge select mode right here, we can just select one edge like this one right here and hit Control B, and that will bevel only that edge. Let's select the one on the other side and hit Control B. And before you hit left click or enter, you can also use the scroll wheel, and that will add some segments like this to make it smoother. If we press left click to place it right there, you'll also see this menu open up, and this will happen with most of the tools and other mesh operations that I'm showing you. You get a lot of other options that you can control in here, and I'm not going to talk about what a lot of them do, but for instance, you can use this shape option to make it convex or concave. And just like extruding, we also have a bevel tool, and this is going to work pretty much the same way. You can just select an edge and then pull on it, and it will bevel it for you. And one thing about all of the tools is that if you hit N to open up this side panel right here and go to the tool tab, you'll also have a lot of options right here, and they should be the same as the ones in here, except these ones only appear when you have the tool selected. I'll switch back to the selection tool, and I'll go into Vertex Select right here. And as you can see, if we hit Control B with only one point selected, it's not actually going to bevel. But if you look at the bottom, it will tell us a lot of different shortcuts that we have. And one of them is the V button. So if we hit V, it will start to bevel the vertices like that. There's also a separate shortcut, which is Control Shift B. And that will just bevel the points like that. And same as before, if you use the scroll wheel, you can add some more segments like this. So let's press tab to go back into object mode. Again, I'm just going to move this to the side over here, and I'll add in a new cube with Shift A, and we can select a cube, hit tab again to go into edit mode. To inset a face, you need to be in face select mode. You can just select a face and press I like this. And when you have it where you want it, you can press left click. Now let's press I again, and as you can see, there are shortcuts at the top this time. Sometimes shortcuts will be at the top, sometimes they'll be at the bottom, but you can see we have a bunch of other options. The one that I use the most is probably individual, which is I. So let's select multiple faces now. Let's select these two faces and press I. You can see by default the inset faces are connected, but if we press I before we press left click or enter, then we're insetting them individually. And there is a tool for this one also, so you can select the inset tool, and this is just going to work the same exact way. And just like before, we have other tool settings up here, and we also have this menu down here. Just for some fun, let's select these faces that we inset and just scale them down a little so that we can actually see a difference when we go back into object mode. So let's make a new cube. We can drag this off to the side, Shift A, add in a cube, and tab into edit mode. We have the loop cut tool right here, so you can click on that, and you can see when you hover over edges, it will show you where it's going to add a loop. And if we left click, then it will actually place the loop. I don't actually use the loop cut tool a lot, but I use the shortcut all the time. So let's go back to the selection tool, and the shortcut is Control R. So now if you press left click, it will start sliding it like this. And if you want it to be right in the center where it was, you can right click and that will place it in the center. Or if you want to place it off to the side, then you just left click again. So after pressing Control R and before pressing anything else, you can also use the scroll wheel, and that will insert multiple loops right here. And then when you left click, you'll also have the option to slide those around, but I'll just hit right click to leave them in the middle. If you want to select a loop going all the way around, you can hold Alt and left click it. And if we go into X-ray mode, you can see that's selected all the way around now. And this is going to be a lot faster than just holding Shift and left click like this to go all the way around, especially as objects get more complex. Let's select this one with Alt and left click, and then we can just scale it down. Let's hit Control R to add another one right here, and we can scale that also. One thing that's important to know about loop cuts is that they work best with quads. And when I say quads, I just mean faces that have 4 points like this. And there are some things that you can do in edit mode that will make your faces not be quads anymore. For instance, if I select some of the edges up here and I bevel them with Control B like this, now this face right here has a lot of extra points going around it. And if we try to use the loop cut tool, it's not really going to know which edges to connect. With quads, it'll just connect to the face that's straight across like that. And typically leaving your faces as quads is going to give you the most flexibility. Let's just hit Control Z to undo that bevel. Let's add a loop cut right here with Control R on this angled spot, and let's hit right click to place it in the very center. And if you want to move it after you place it, you can just hit G to move it around, but as you can see, it deforms quite a bit. So if you want to slide it up and down, you can hit G and then G again, and that will enter loop slide mode right here. And as you can see, it's not changing the angle of any of those faces right there, which is pretty nice. There is a tool for that if you go down a little further. It's called edge slide, and that's going to work the same exact way. If you click and hold on the loop cut tool, we also have the offset edge loop tool. And if you click and drag, you can see that it'll create 2 loops from the center right there. All right, let's go back to the selection tool, hit tab to go into object mode, move this to the side, and let's add a new one with Shift A and go into edit mode. Next, let's talk about the knife tool. So you can start with just clicking on an edge like this, and then you can left click to draw pretty much whatever shape you want. And when you're done, you can hit enter. And if you don't end by connecting it to another edge or another point, then it will create them for you like that. Now, if we switch back to the selection tool and go into face select, now we have this pretty complex face right here that you can then do whatever you want with, like extrude it. If you don't want to use the tool, you can also press K and then you can draw whatever you want and just press enter when you're done. If we long press on this, we also have the bisect tool right here. And to use this, you need to select everything that you want to bisect first. So we can just hit A like that. And now if we click and drag, we'll be able to draw a line like this. And if we rotate around, you can see that it cut all the way through our object. So if we check one of these clear options and then hit A to select everything and click and drag, you can see that it's going to start cutting stuff away like that, but it will leave a hole. And if you don't want it to leave a hole, that's what the fill option is for. So let's hit Control Z, turn on the fill option, and then we can click and drag and take a look at it, and you can see that it's actually filled right there. So you can have a lot of fun with this. Just make sure to select what you want first, and then you can click and drag like this. You can make some pretty interesting shapes like, rocks and things like that. Let's go back into object mode, move this to the side, and create another shape. But for this, I'm going to bring in a plane instead. We can tab into edit mode, and that's because we're using the poly build tool, which is going to work better with planes. And when we have the tool selected, you can see that we can hover over edges like this, and we can hover over points. So if we click and drag on an edge, it will basically just extrude it for us like that. And clicking and dragging on a vertex will just move it around for us like this. So I don't use this very often, but I could see how it would be useful for things like retopology and stuff like that, which is a more complex subject that I'm not really going to be talking about in this video. Let's tab out of edit mode and move this off to the side and add a new cube with Shift A and tab into edit mode. So for the spin tool, make sure you're in face select mode up here, and let's just select this one face on the side. And depending on what direction you want to spin in, we have these axis options up here. I'll change this to Y, and I'll press 1 on the number pad. Now this is going to work differently depending on where your 3D cursor is. So if you want to move that, you can hold Shift and right click, and I'll just place it down here, right there. And let's click and drag this gizmo right here. And you can see that it starts spinning around in kind of a circular motion. And when we let go, we'll have these options down here where we can change the angle. So if we want this to only go halfway, we can change it to 180. You can also up the step count like this. And we can also change where it's pivoting around right here if you don't want to move the 3D cursor. This widget also lets us change things over here. So with these arrows, you can move them around. And there's a little circle in the middle that you can click and drag to move both axes right there. This one's a lot of fun, could be really good for things like cup handles or doorknobs or, air vents. There are a ton of things you could make with this. Let's tab out of edit mode, move this off to the side, and I'll create a new cube. But I want our 3D cursor to move back to the center, so I'll hit Shift S and choose cursor to world origin like that. Then we can hit Shift A and add in a new cube and tab into edit mode. Let's switch back to the selection tool, and I'm just going to hit A to select everything, and we can right click and choose Subdivide. Subdivide is a way of adding a lot more geometry. So as you can see, each face turned into 4 faces. And if we use this menu down here, we can change the amount of cuts like that. And we also have this smoothness option that is going to be really helpful for if you want things to be spherical. And you can just set it to 1 for things to be like perfect spheres, but I'm going to leave it set to 0 because I want to show you how to use the smooth tool. If we click on that with everything selected and we click and drag, this is going to start smoothing things out, and it will act pretty differently depending on what your shape is right there. So as you can see, it's kind of only targeting the faces that are close to the edges. And if it's surrounded by other faces that are at the same angle, then it's not going to actually smooth those out. You can also long press on this and choose randomize, and that's just going to make all of the faces get a little noisy like this and a little more random. I'll hit Control Z though, because I don't want to do that. You can also subdivide individual faces. So let's just select this one face in the middle. I'll go back to the selection tool, and we can right click and choose subdivide like that, and add as many as we want. But it is worth mentioning that now these faces right here are no longer quads because they have extra points in here like this, which means we won't be able to easily loop cut through them with Control R. There are other ways of adding geometry and smoothing things out, and I'll talk more about those later. But let's tab out of edit mode, move this off to the side, and create a new object. And I'm going to bring in a torus right here. Now let's tab into edit mode, and we'll use the shrink and fatten tool right here. And this will basically make it so that every face or point, depending on, what mode you're in, is going to push straight out in the normal direction. And if you don't know what the normal direction is, you can actually see it if you go up to the top right here under overlays. At the very bottom, you can turn on the normals. So right here we have the face normals. So as you can see, the normal is basically just sticking straight out from each face like that. And that's the direction that it's going to move in with the shrink and fatten tool. It's a little noisy with this turned on, so I'm just going to turn it off. And there's also a shortcut for this that I use pretty often, which is Alt-S, like that. And this is going to be very handy for if you're selecting an entire loop, again with Alt and left click, because if you want to push everything outward, you can't really use G to push it in the outward direction. You have to use Alt-S to push it outward in the normal direction like that. This is also really useful for insetting and extruding. So let's select this entire loop with Alt and left click, and let's hit I and then I again for individual faces, and then we can hit Alt S, and now each of those faces will push directly outward like that. I think this is a really underused tool, and it's really worth learning how to use. Let's tab out of edit mode, bring this over. I'll press Shift A, and this time we'll add in a cylinder and tab into edit mode. And we can select the top face right here and just extrude it up with E like this. So if we wanted this to be like a pipe going at a 90-degree angle, you'd think that you would be able to just rotate it, but as you can see, it's going to kind of change the angle of the sides right here. So the tool that we would use to do that is called the Shear tool right here. So we can click on that, and it will give us two different axis options. So the one we want to use is this one right here. We can click and drag it. So you can see now that it's like it's rotating, except it will change the size of the face so that all of these faces are still going in the same direction like that. I don't use this tool very often. Instead, I use the shortcut, which is Control, Alt, Shift, and S. It's just all of the modifier keys. And if you don't see it moving, then it's probably the wrong axis. So you can hit X or Y until it starts moving like that. And if you want it to go perfectly at 45 degrees, you can press 1 like that. And if you want it to go the other direction, just press negative, press the minus button. Then you can left click to place it, and you can extrude it. If you want it to go on the X axis instead of the normal direction, just press X first like this. And then we can shear it again with Control, Alt, Shift, S, and press 1 like that. And now we have a perfect 90-degree pipe like this. If we long press on the shear tool, we also have to sphere right here. And if we hover over it, it says that the shortcut is Shift Alt S. So just to show you what I mean, let's tab out of edit mode and move this off to the side. And let's add in another cube with Shift A. Tab into edit mode, select everything with A, and let's subdivide this a few times. Turn this up quite a bit. So if we wanted to turn this into a sphere now, and we don't have the option anymore, we can use the to sphere tool. You can basically click anywhere and start dragging right, and it will turn it into a sphere. And this is going to work for pretty much any shape. So let's delete this actually and add in Suzanne the monkey, and we can try this on Suzanne. We can click and drag like that, and it's going to try its best to turn all of the points into a sphere. We have some overlapping faces, but it is in fact a sphere. And like I said before, the shortcut for this is Shift Alt S, so we can try that, and it works just the same. So I'm gonna hit A to select everything, and then M to move to a collection, and you can choose this new collection option, give it whatever name you want, and click OK. And then we can just click this checkbox and all of them will be hidden. Then I'll add in a cube with Shift A, tab into edit mode, and let's talk more about extruding because we have quite a few options when it comes to extruding. So I said before that you can select a face and press E to extrude, but this also works with edges, so we can hit 2 to go into edge select mode, Select this edge right here and press E, and you can see instead of extruding the whole face, it's only going to extrude the edge, so we have this like two-dimensional plane sticking out. And this also works for vertices too, so you can select a single point and hit E, and it will just make edges like that. These options might not seem very useful, but in certain contexts they are. Like if you want to create a 3D object from scratch, you could start with a single point and work off of that. Some people prefer doing that. If we go back to the extrude tool and long press on it, you can see we have these other options. We have extrude manifold, extrude along normals, extrude individual, and extrude to cursor. So if you want, you can check out these tools right here, but I actually prefer to use the shortcuts for all of these. And it's pretty easy to remember because the shortcut is the same for all of them. It's just Alt-E. So let's go to face select mode, select a face and press Alt-E. And you can see we have all the same options as that tool. And we also have extrude repeat and spin right here. By default, when you extrude a face, it will extrude in the normal direction and you can go in or out like that. But when you have more than one face selected, instead of both of them extruding in the normal direction, it will kind of average the direction. So instead of this one pushing directly out and that face pushing directly out, it will kind of go diagonally like that. So if you do want it to go directly out, that's when you would press Alt-E and choose extrude face along normals. Now you can see they both push directly out in the normal direction like that. And you might notice that it's not completely parallel right here. That's because it's keeping these edges like the same length. If you don't want that to be the case, you can open up this menu and choose offset even like that, and it will make it parallel for you. This is something that becomes very useful for when you want to extrude around corners. So if we select all these three right here and hit E to extrude, you can see it averages them out and it just pushes directly out. We're going to have some overlapping faces and things like that. But if we hit Alt-E and choose extrude face along normals, now it'll push out in every direction, which is probably more what you're trying to do. Let's hit Control-Z to go back, press Alt-E again, and choose extrude individual faces. So you can see this is doing a very similar thing, except now these edges right here are no longer connected. Let's select everything with A and X to delete it and bring in an icosphere instead. Now we can press I to inset, I again for individual faces, and if we hit Alt-E and extrude individual faces, we can now make a spiky ball like that. So having access to these options allow you to make some pretty complex shapes really quickly. I'm just going to hit Control-Z to go back to the cube right here, and with this all selected, I'll right-click and subdivide this a few times to explain the next part. Make sure you're in face select mode for this, and let's just select this corner face right here, hit E to extrude. You can see when we go up, it kind of acts the way we expect, but if we go down, we'll end up with some overlapping faces because it's not going to delete the faces right here for us as we go down. So that's what the extrude manifold option is for. So let's press Alt-E and choose extrude manifold. And when we pull it down, we no longer have overlapping faces. It will actually start deleting points for us. One thing to note though is that now these faces right here, they're no longer quads. They actually have 5 points. One of the other tools in here is extrude to cursor, and the shortcut for that is not Alt-E. You can see it's not in this menu. The shortcut is actually Control and right click. So if I hold Control and start right clicking, you can see that it'll continue to extrude and rotate to my cursor like that. Let's tab out of edit mode and move this to the side and create a new cube. Tab back into edit mode, and let's talk about some other bevel options. So I'll hit 2 to go into edge select mode, select this edge right here, and Control B to bevel, and we can left click to place it. And in this menu right here, the main one that I want to talk about is custom, and this is where you can actually make some custom shapes. But the thing about this is that you need to make sure you have enough segments for it to actually make that shape. So let's turn this up pretty high. You can see the higher we turn it up, the more accurately it's matching this shape right here. And we do have a few presets right here. So we have, crown molding like that. We also have steps right here. This isn't related to beveling, but I do think it's interesting. Let's go to face select mode, select this face right here, right click. I want to talk about poke faces. So when we do that, you can see this face turned into triangles, and it left a point in the center for us right here. So you could use this to easily make kind of pyramid shapes and things like that. And this is different from just triangulating faces, because if we select this top one, right click, we also have triangulate faces right here. And you can see it won't ever put a point in the very center the way poke faces does. It'll just connect corner to corner like that. And if we want to turn it back, we can right click with those selected. And we also have tries to quads, and we'll try to reverse it. This doesn't always work for very complex meshes, but when it works pretty well. I use this a lot when I'm importing models made in different programs. Let's select this top face and extrude it with E and scale it down a little right here. And then we can add a loop cut with Control R. Now I already talked about sliding the loop with G and then G again, like that, where it doesn't change the angle of the faces. This also works for vertices, so we can go into vertex select mode and just select a single one and hit G and G again, like that. And you can see it'll let us change which edge we want to slide along, like that. If you want to lock it to that axis, you can hold Alt like that, and it will extend it, as you can see here. Let's tab out of edit mode and move this one to the side and create a new shape. So for this one, I'll create a plane and tab into edit mode. And with everything still selected, I'm just going to right click and subdivide it quite a bit. I'll turn this up to something high, like 25. And let's talk about proportional editing. So let's just select one of these points. It could be any one. And we can go up to the top right here and turn on proportional editing, or you can hit the O button to toggle it on and off. And now when we hit G to move this, you can see that it's moving quite a few points and not just the single one we selected. And if you use the scroll wheel, that will change the area of influence like that. And if you don't want it to be smooth like this, you can change the profile. I'll hit Control Z and we can click this button up here, and we have a bunch of other profiles to choose from. So if you want it to be more like a bubble, you could choose sphere. Let's select one in the middle and pull that up. And you can see it's more spherical, like kind of how a bubble would be. I use that one a lot, and I also use sharp a lot too. This would be good for if you're trying to make like a mountain shape or something like that. And then obviously there is linear, which is just going to be completely straight like that, like a cone. I like to work with as few points as I need, and then I'll add more as I need them. But if you are trying to work with a whole lot of points like this, then proportional editing is really useful. And don't forget that you can rotate and scale with this too to make some, spirally shapes. Just like in object mode, we can also delete points in edit mode. So let's just select some of these points and press X to delete. You can see we have all these options in here. We can choose to delete all of the vertices right there, and it will delete pretty much anything that's connected to those points. Like these points along the edge are part of these faces, so if we delete the vertices, those faces will be gone too. But we do have some other options, so I'll switch into face select mode, and we can press X and delete faces like that. And it's not going to delete the faces around the edge, only the ones that you had selected. If you ever have a face missing like this, and you can't just press Control Z because you did a bunch of other actions in between, you can actually fill it back in. All you need to do is select the points that make up the face, and then press F. And if you want, you can make faces from scratch this way. We're still in vertex select mode. Let's just select this one point right here and extrude it outward. We can do the same thing with that using E, and let's select all 4 of these and hit F. We can also just duplicate this point with Shift D, so now we have 2 points that aren't connected. And if we try to use F on 2 points, instead of creating a face, it'll just create an edge like that. And you can make triangles with this too if you only select 3. And it will make n-gons if you have more than 4 points. So we can select all of these right here, and this one to close it, and press F, and now we have this n-gon right here. If you wanted to turn this into quads, you would think that maybe you could just select these 2 points and press F, and it might look like it worked, but if we go into face select mode and we try to select this, it's still one big face, and this edge right here is actually not connected to the face. It's not splitting the face down the middle. So to do that, instead of using F, you have to use J, like that, and that will actually split the faces. So now we have 2 faces right here. And we can do that one more time, like this, press J, and now we have 3 quads right here. Still in edit mode, let's press A to select everything and X to delete all the vertices. Let's Shift A to add in an icosphere, and with that still selected, let's duplicate it with Shift D. So because we did all of this in edit mode, when we tab out of edit mode, you can see these are both one single object, and if we move them around, they all move together. If we wanted to turn these into 2 separate objects, we can do that in edit mode. Just select the one that you want. So I'll go into X-ray mode, and I'll just Shift select until we actually have this whole thing selected. And then we can press P to separate it by selection right here. You can also separate it by loose parts because you can see that these 2 are not connected, so that would also work. But we can hit P, choose selection, and then when we tab back into object mode, you can see now they're 2 different objects. And if you ever have 2 separate objects that you want to turn into a single object, you can just select both of them and press Ctrl J, and now they're one single object again. Just know that when you do this, the last object that you select, that's the one that they'll all be joined into. So it'll use like the origin point of the last object you have selected. Let's go back into edit mode, and I'll press A to select everything and X to delete everything. And I'll press Shift A to add in a cube, and let's subdivide this a little. So with everything selected, right click, choose subdivide, and we'll turn the number of cuts up quite a bit. So I mentioned before that you can select entire loops with Alt and left click like that. So this works for faces. It also works in edge select mode right here. And it does work in vertex select mode too. But there are a ton of other ways to select things in edit mode. So I use box select a lot. You can just click and drag right here to see all of the other selection tools. I talked about these in the first video, so I'm not really going to go over them a lot, but I use box select quite a bit. That's the default. You can just click and drag to use that. And if you press C, that'll go into circle select where you can then draw like this. And if you hold shift, that will start undoing faces and the scroll wheel will make the selection bigger or smaller. And when you're done, you can right click. Another one I use a lot is control and left click. So let's left click this one right here and then control left click over here, and it will choose the shortest path right there. And this works when you go at other angles too. So we can select this, control left click. You can just keep control left clicking to create like a spiral like that. You can do this at an angle and it will try to find the shortest path right here. Another one I use a lot is L. So you can just hover over any of these faces and press L, and that's called select linked. So by default, it'll select everything that is connected. So now that this is entirely selected, we can Shift D to duplicate it right here, and I'll press Alt A to deselect. And if we press L on this, you can see it selected this whole piece, this whole connected mesh, and this one's not selected because it's not connected. For example, if we press Shift A and add in Suzanne the monkey and bring her up here, the eyes are actually not connected to the rest of the head, so you can press L to select just the eyes like that. And then we can, do whatever we want with them. I guess a thing worth repeating that I mentioned in the first video is that we do have other pivot options. So if we scale these down, they're going to scale towards each other. But if we press period, we have all of these other options. You can also find those up here if you don't want to use the period shortcut. So I like to use individual origins a lot, and that just means that every disconnected part will have its own scaling point like this. Just make sure to turn it back to median point when you're done with it. Let's select everything with A and delete it with X. And I'm going to add in 2 icospheres again. We can just Shift D to duplicate that. Now let's talk about if we want to punch a hole into an object. Let's just go into X-ray mode for this, and I'll press C to circle select, and we'll just select a lot of these faces in the center. And because we're in X-ray mode, you can see that we actually selected faces on both sides right here. So with the faces selected, we can right click and choose bridge faces right here. And that will connect the faces all the way through and cut this hole into it. And you can see that we have some options in this menu right here. So if we wanted to add some cuts, that will basically create edge loops all the way through. And you can use this twist option right here if you want it to kind of spiral through. But this works better for some other shapes, so I'll just set it to 0. So you can use this for punching holes into things, but you can also use it to connect to objects. So let's select some faces over here, and I'll also select some faces right here. And we can right click and bridge faces like that. And you can see now they're connected. And if we add a few more cuts, this will get quite a bit cleaner. You can see that it'll try to change the angle all the way through to make it clean. And you can change this smoothness right here to change the shape. If you wanted to connect 2 faces without bridging them like this, you can do that, but it's a little more complicated. I think it's worth talking about though. So let's just select a face right here and press 1 to look from the front. And I'm just going to extrude this with control and right click, and we'll just extrude this all the way around to make a loop like this. Now I'll press 1 to go into vertex select mode, and I want to merge some of these points together so that it bridges across. I'll connect this face and this face right here. I'll press 1 to go into vertex select mode, and I'll select this point and this point right here. And if we press M, we get this merge option. So we can merge them at the center, which is where this gizmo is right here. But we have some other options like at first, at last. It'll pay attention to what order you're selecting them in and choose the first one or the last one. So I'll choose at center. You can see now these two are merged up. I'll select this one and this one right here, M to merge, at center, and then this point and this point, M to merge, at center. And now this is a completely connected loop. But if we go into X-ray mode with Alt-Z and then face select, you'll see that we still have a face in the center right here that we have to delete. So we can just delete that with X, delete faces, and now we don't have any hidden interior faces like that. So like I said, it's a little more complex, but merging is actually used quite a bit. And before we start making our scene, I want to talk about modifiers. So let's add in a cube. And if we want to smooth this cube out, we have a few options. The first option I showed is with the smooth tool right here, which I actually don't use very often. I usually use the Subdivision surface modifier. So to access modifiers, you just want to select your object, go over to this wrench icon right here. It's called modifier properties. and then you can add modifiers over here. So click this, go down to Subdivision Surface. You can see now that it added quite a few faces and it's starting to smooth our cube out. So we have different settings for the viewport and for when you render. So that means if we turn this one up right here, you're not actually going to notice a difference until we render it out. The nice thing about modifiers is that they're non-destructive, meaning if we go back into edit mode, you can see that our original cube is still right here, and this is just kind of like a filter that's on top of it. The subdivision surface modifier is kind of just like subdividing right here, except it does it non-destructively, and it tries to average out each point that it adds so that it makes it smoother. You can also choose simple right here, which will add points, but it won't smooth them out. And you can see those by going into wireframe mode and turning off optimal display. You can see that when we turn this up, it's getting more dense. This modifier is really commonly used, and honestly, I could make a whole entire video about it. The last thing I'll say about it is that if you press N under item, we actually have some extra options now. Let's go into edge select mode and select this edge right here. If I wanted this edge to be completely sharp still and not smooth out, then we can use this crease option and it will sharpen it out. We can do that with entire faces too. So if I want the bottom to be flat, so it's kind of like a gumdrop shape, then we can turn this up right here. Another really useful modifier is the mirror modifier. So we can add a new one, choose mirror right here, and you won't immediately notice anything because this is already symmetrical. But if we go back into edit mode and select everything and move it to the side, you can see now that it's mirroring on the x-axis. And we do have some other options over here to mirror, like on the y and on the z. So we can just move this around right here. And by default, it's going to look at the origin point right here and mirror based on that. But if you want, you can add another object. So I'll press Shift A and I'll add in an empty right here. An empty is just an object that you can't see when you render it out, and people like to use them for referencing and things like that. So if we want, we can use that as the mirror object. You can either select it by name, or you can click this eyedropper right here and select it from the outliner or from the viewport. And now we can move these in object mode and it will just mirror based on where this is. And what's cool is you can actually rotate this too, which is an option that you don't have otherwise. But let's just delete that and move it back to the center with Alt-G. If you want to be able to edit all of these individual faces that you can see, then you have to apply your modifiers. You can do that with this little arrow right here and choose Apply. You won't notice anything change visually, but if we tab back into edit mode, now we can actually select each individual face and do whatever we want with it. But it's important to know that if you have a whole bunch of modifiers right here, you have to apply them in order. This is easy to explain with a bevel modifier, so we can add a bevel modifier in right here, and we can click these arrows to minimize them. So first it's subdividing them, then it's mirroring, and then it's beveling. But if we move the bevel to the top, now the subdivision isn't working the same. So what's happening now is that it's beveling our cube first, and then it's trying to subdivide it. And because of these extra edges right here, it's not going to look as round. But if we subdivide first, then it's making it completely round, and then we can bevel it, and then the sharp part is going to bevel at the bottom. And if we apply the bevel, even though it's not at the very top, then it's going to act like the bevel was first. So just make sure that you're always applying things in order from top to bottom if you don't want them to change the way they look. All right, let's select all of these with A, move them to their own collection with M, and then we can hide these ones too, and we can get started with our scene. I'll start simple and get more complicated as we go on. Let's make a crate, and we can start with Shift A, add in a cube, and we can tab into edit mode. Everything's still selected. Let's just hit G, Z, and 1 to move it up 1 meter. That way the origin point is on the very bottom. Let's hit I and I again to inset individual faces. And with all of these still selected, let's right click and poke faces. With everything still selected, hit I and make sure you're still set to individual faces right here. Move that in a little bit. Then we can press Alt E and extrude faces along normals and just pull it in a little bit. And then hit Tab to go back into object mode. And here we have a simple crate. Now, if you want to stay organized, you can name these too. So let's just select the object and hit F2, and we can name it crate. We're going to have a lot of objects, so having names is going to be pretty helpful. And let's just hide this for now with H. Let's make the building next, and for that we can start with a cube also. So Shift A, add in a cube, tab into edit mode, and again I'll press G, Z, and 1 to move it up 1 meter. I like doing this so that when we're back in object mode and we scale it up, you can see that it's always scaling from the bottom. So for this I'll add a loop cut with Control R, and I'll put it right in the middle and right click so it stays in the very center. And then we can bevel this with Control B, and this is going to determine how thick our walls are. So I'll put it maybe right about here. I'll press Control R again to add another one in the center, and right click, and Control B to bevel that one also. This is going to be our window. After left clicking, I think I want this up a little higher, so I'll just pull it up a little bit right there, and I'll press Control R again, and this is going to be for our counter. And I think we can start extruding now. So let's press 3 to go into face select mode. We can select this face right here. And let's go into X-ray mode with either Alt-Z, or you can press this button up here. Press 3 to look from the side, E to extrude, and I'll place it right about here. That's how deep our counter is going to be. E to extrude one more time, and this is going to be the rest of our room. And now Alt-Z to exit X-ray mode. Now if we want, we can select this inside face, look from the side again, Alt-Z, and E to extrude downward, and this is just going to be for our floor. It's starting to come together. Let's select some of the faces on the front, so I'll left click and hold Control and keep left clicking. This will choose the shortest path, like this. And I also want to select the counter piece right here, and we can E to extrude that out just a little bit, and then I'll select just the counter and extrude that out just a little bit further. I want to add some trim around the outside, so let's add another loop cut with Control R, and I'll bring it down right about here. Switch to face select mode by pressing 3, and then we can Alt and left click, and that will just select the loop going all the way around. We can press Alt E and extrude faces along normals. And let's hold shift while we move this out so it doesn't extrude as fast. And then with this option down here, we can choose offset even. And now the edges won't be nearly as round around the corners right there. We can add a flat roof now. So let's just select all the faces on the top. We can just shift click all of these and E to extrude for however thick we want the roof to be. And then let's Alt and left click right here. And again, press Alt E, extrude faces along normals like this. And if you don't want it to be round like that, offset even. Let's make a little canopy right here. First, I'll add a loop cut with Control R right about here. Press 3 to go into face select mode, and we can just extrude this out with E. Let's go into edge select mode, select this top edge, and we can just pull it down a little like that. While you're doing this, don't forget to save with Control S. Let's make one window on the side right here. I'll decide where I want to put the window on the side with another loop cut with Control R right there, and we can Control B to bevel it. Make sure you're in face select mode, and you can just select that one face right here. Extrude that out with E, I to inset, and left click when it's as thick as you want it to be. And then we can press E to extrude it in just a little bit right there. With this still selected, let's right click, subdivide it once, and this is going to create some n-gons on the side, but that's okay because I'm not planning on adding any more loop cuts going through or a subdivision surface modifier or anything like that. Now press I to inset and press I again if it's not set to individual like that, and then extrude in a little more. Press tab to go back into object mode, and here we have our basic building. I'm going to move this to the side over here so that when we add new objects, they still appear in the center of our world at our 3D cursor. And I'll make a cache register next. If you ever want to use reference photos, it's really easy to bring them into Blender. I have some reference photos right here that I just found on Google Images. Some of them are JPEG, some are PNG, and some are WebP, and all of these are compatible. All you have to do is click and drag them into Blender like this. And then when we go back in here, you'll see it might be at a weird angle, but you can reset the rotation with Alt-R, and then I'll just press RX90 like that. And we have some settings down over here. For instance, if you want to see through it, you can turn on opacity and just turn this down a little. And if we wanted to actually model something lining up to this, now we would be able to. I'm not going to model on top of this image right here to make the cache register, but we will do some of that later. So for now, I'll just delete this with X. And I'll add in a cube with Shift A, tab into edit mode, G, Z, 1 to move it up like that. And I'm going to change the snapping up here to face project, and I'll set that to center. Setting it to center is going to make it so that when it snaps, it uses the origin point to snap. And now if we move this around with G and hold Control, we can snap this to the surface of any of the objects that we have over here. I like to do this to figure out size, so now I can just scale it down. And again, I'm in object mode for this. So scale it down until you think it's a good size. And I can press G and Control to put it on the counter right here where the cache register is going to be. And I think that's a pretty good size. So we can move it back to the middle with Alt G, and let's apply the scale with Control A. Now we can tab into edit mode and we can get started with the modeling. I'm in face select mode right here, and I'll just select this top face and I'll bring it down. Press Ctrl R to add a loop cut right about here. Press 3 to go into face select mode. We can select this face. I to inset. E to extrude up a little bit. E to extrude again. 2 for edge select. Select this edge right here. Pull it in so we have a slope like that. 3 for face select. Select this face right here. E to extrude. And I want there to be a little panel up here. So let's add a loop cut with Ctrl R and Ctrl B to bevel. Ctrl R for another loop cut right here, and Ctrl B to bevel like that. So now we have this little square in the center. We can press 3 to face select, select that face. E to extrude again, S to scale. Let's do S and X and scale it wide like that. And E to extrude one more time. Tab to go back into object mode, and here we have a simple cash register. We can just move this into place with G and Control, and we can set it down on the counter over here. And let's name this, and we'll make some lamps to put up here above the counter. So for this, we can start with a cylinder. So Shift A, add in a cylinder right here. If you want to change the amount of points going around, you can do that right here. I'll just set this to be more low poly at about 16, and we can close this panel. Let's tab into edit mode, G, Z, and I'll type in -1. That way the origin point is at the top this time. Tab back into object mode, and we can scale this down quite a bit. And let's press G and Control, and we can snap it up here just so that we can get the size right. I'll scale it down with S a little bit more. So let's press Control A to apply the scale, and we can tab into edit mode, and I'll just work on it over here. I'll press period on the number pad to focus on it. Let's select this bottom face right here, and I'll press 1 to look from the front. E to extrude, S to scale, E to extrude, S to scale. We'll make it round very slightly, and E to extrude one more time. We can look from the bottom now. Let's inset this with I, like that. Inset again, and we can press G and Z to move that up a little bit. I to inset, this will be for like the light bulb area. E to extrude, and let's bevel this edge with Control B, like that. I think that looks pretty good. Let's change the shading. So in object mode, we can right click and choose shade auto smooth like that. And that's going to make it so some parts with subtle angles will be smooth, but we'll also have sharp edges in some spots. Let's name this really quick with F2. And I want 3 of these. So I'll press 1 to look from the front, and Shift D, X to move it on the X axis, Shift D, X, and we'll move that to the middle. And I want these to be above the counter too, so I'll check from the side. First, I'll select all of them with Shift and left click, press 3, Alt Z to go into X-ray mode, and I'll just drag them in a little bit like that. While I'm working on this, I'm thinking about what angle I want the final render to be at. At an angle kind of like this is going to be good. And I think this is a good thing to do so that you don't spend time working on things that you aren't going to see. Let's make a table next, and for this we'll start with a cylinder also. So Shift A, Mesh, Cylinder, and we still have this set to 16, which I think is fine. Tab into edit mode, G, Z, 1 to move it up like that. Let's tab back into object mode and just scale this down quite a bit. I'll press Control A and apply the scale, and tab into edit mode and period to focus on it. Select this top face. Let's pull that down a little bit. E to extrude, S to scale. This is going to be like the base of the table. We can E to extrude and S to scale again. So we have a shape that's kind of like the lamp right here. This will be the post in the middle. E to extrude that up. Let's press 1 and zoom out to compare the height to the counter right here. Right about here, that looks pretty good. Now let's press E, and before left clicking, let's press S instead, and that will scale it out like this. And we'll have some overlapping faces, but that's fine because we're going to extrude it immediately after. E to extrude again, and there we have our table. Let's tab out of edit mode. Let's right click and shade auto smooth for this also. And if you have this widget here, you can press the blue rectangle and move that around. If you don't have that, you can press G and Shift Z, and that will do the same thing. I'll wait until the end to set the final position for all of our things that we make. We can make a little stool for this, and this should be pretty easy. We can start with a cube, tab into edit mode, G, Z, 1, back into object mode, and let's scale this down until it's a width that we think is pretty good. Control A to apply the scale, and we can tab into edit mode right here. Let's go into X-ray mode so that we can see all the way through, and I'll press 1 to go into vertex select mode and select all of these bottom points. And we'll move that up right about here. And this is going to be the seat part of our stool. Control R to add a loop cut going across. Control R to add one the other way. And then let's look from the bottom and go into face select mode and select these bottom faces, I, and I again if you don't have individual faces going. This is going to be for the legs, so decide the thickness right about here, and we can look from the front and E to extrude, and just make that go to about this line right here. And if you want to be really precise, you can change the snapping to increment and set that to absolute grid snap right there. And then when you move this, you can hold Control and you can snap it exactly to the grid right about there. I'll change snapping back to face project though. And then we can tab back into object mode and move this over right about here, give it a name. And we can duplicate this with Shift D, and while we're moving it around, press X to move it on the X axis over to the other side of the table. Next, let's model some carafes to put on the counter right here. Carafes are just these like container things that hold milk and coffee and things like that. I do have a reference of one right here, so I'll just drag that in and we can just look at it as we model. I'm not going to model directly on top of it because it's at a weird angle, but it might be useful to just have in here. I'll clear the rotation with Alt R and then press R, X, and 90 to rotate it 90 degrees so it's completely straight now. And for this, let's start with a cylinder. So we can hit Shift A, add in a cylinder, and I'm going to change the vertice count to 16 because I think that's a good amount. Let's close this menu, tab into edit mode, G, Z, and 1. And then back in object mode, let's just scale it down. And again, if we want to compare the size to the counter, we can press G and hold Control. And because I'm using face snapping, it'll snap right to the counter right there. So let's scale this down just a little more. Let's bring it back to the center with Alt-G, press period to zoom in, and Control-A to apply the scale. Then we can tab into edit mode and actually start modeling this. I'll press 1 to go into vertex select mode and make sure we're using X-ray so that when we select these points on the top, we're selecting them all the way through. And let's just try to match these proportions. So let's make this a little taller right here. We can press E to extrude and S to scale, E to extrude, E to extrude a little bit more. This is where the handle will attach to right there and the spout. We can E to extrude and then scale this in just a little bit right there. And let's try beveling some of these loops to see how they look. Alt-Z to exit X-ray mode, 2 to go into edge select. And with this top ring still selected, I'll press Control-B and we can bevel that right there. Let's select this loop with Alt and left click, Control-B to bevel that. We can just make some of these a little smoother. Alt and left click to select this loop, Control-B to bevel, and let's bevel the bottom also. So Alt and left click, Control-B to bevel. And let's use the scroll wheel to add maybe 2 more cuts like that, and then left click to place it. Now I want the spout to be on one of these front faces right here. Let's go into face select mode and just select these 2 right here. We can press E to extrude and it should just bring it straight out like that. Now this is a good opportunity to use edge sliding and vertex sliding. So press 2 to go into edge select mode. Let's select this one, shift and left click to select the other one, and we can press G and then G again, and we will start sliding the loops like this. We can pull it back to make it a little more triangular, as you can see. 1 to go into vertex select. Let's select this front one right here and press G twice and we can slide it upward like this. 2 to go into edge select, select this edge right here, shift select that one, G and Z, just bring those straight up like this. Let's make this handle that we can see right here. So on the other side now, 3 to go into face select. Let's select these right here. And we could do this a few different ways. If you want, you can just E to extrude and then R to rotate. This is going to be best when you hit 3 to look from the side. Or you could use the spin tool right here, but we're going to have to change some of these settings. So N to go into the side panel, tools right here. Let's change this to X, then we can turn that. And let's just move this up here. What I'll do is extrude it out a little bit and then scale it on the X-axis to make it come in a little bit more. 3 to look from the side, extrude just a little bit more, and then I'll Control and right click a few times to just bring this down like that in kind of a curved shape. If you don't like any of the proportions, you can Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, and I'll just select the bottom right here and we can scale it down. I'll press S and Shift-Z to make it skinnier like that. I'll tab into object mode, right click and shade auto smooth. And right now this part I want to be sharp. So let's select the whole top. And as I bring it down, the angle between all of these faces is going to change and it will make that loop sharp. I think that's good. Let's just name this. And we can press G and Control to put it on the counter right here. And let's just add a few more just to fill up some space. So we can Shift D and then hold Control while you're moving it to snap it down. Let's add maybe 4 of these right here. You can press R and Z to rotate some of them to make them a little more random, you know, We can also scale these up and down, so let's make the ones in the back a little bigger. If we don't want them to just scale completely up, but to be taller, we can come into edit mode, Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode. Let's just select this and pull it up so we can have some that are taller but not wider. And let's make this one smaller. And whenever you scale something in object mode, it's probably a good idea to apply the scale. So Control A with all these selected and select scale. Now that we're done with this reference, let's just select it and X to delete it. And next I'll make some plates and some mugs for the table. So let's start with a plate. We can add in a cylinder with Shift A, and 16 vertices is good. Let's zoom out a little. Tab into edit mode, GZ1 to move it up by 1 meter. Tab back into object mode, G and Control to snap it to the table, and then we can scale it down. We can Control A to apply the scale, and then tab into edit mode right here. 3 for face select. Let's select this top face and drag that down right here. I'd like to scale the bottom down, so let's press Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, and then we can select the bottom face right here and scale that down just a little bit. Alt-Z to go back. Select this top face, E to extrude, I to inset, I to inset again, and then we can drag this down. And if you want, you can press 3 to look from the side, and maybe Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, so you know you're not going to go through the bottom like that. Let's scale this out a little bit with S, and tab back into object mode. I think that's pretty good for a plate. Let's right-click and shade auto smooth. Let's name that, and we can duplicate it with Shift-D and move one to the other side as well. Let's make a coffee mug, and for that we'll use a cylinder also. So Shift-A, add in a cylinder. Again, 16 vertices is fine. Tab into edit mode, G, Z, and 1. Enter, tab back into object mode, G to move it, Control to snap it, scale it down with S until it's a size that we want. Our scene is pretty cartoony, so it's okay if the scale isn't perfect. I think it might be nice to have extra large mugs compared to reality. Control A to apply the scale, and tab into edit mode. Let's bevel the bottom to make it smoother, so Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, select the bottom face, and Control B, like that. Add as many loops as you want with the scroll wheel. I think 3 is good. I'll select the top face and I to inset, and because this is cartoony, I'll make it extra thick. And then we can extrude that down. And I'm not going to extrude it all the way down, because later we can change the color of this face to make it look like it's filled with coffee. And the top is still pretty sharp, so let's go into edge select mode with 2, select this loop with Alt and left click, and then Shift Alt left click, so we can select both of these loops, the inner and the outer, and then Control B to bevel that, and we can make it smoother. If you want this to be completely round and it starts overlapping like this, you can press C, and that will make it so that it won't be able to overlap. But be careful, because now we do have some overlapping points. They're just on top of each other in the same position. And if you want all of those to merge together, you can select everything and press M to merge, and merge by distance. And you can see we removed 16 vertices when we did that. I don't want it to be completely round. That was just an example. So I'll press Control Z to go back, and then we can bevel it just a little bit right here. Let's decide where we want our handles to be. We can add some loop cuts with Control R. I'll press left click to place it, and then right click so it stays in the middle. Let's bevel that with Control B. But I'll scroll down so we only have 2 like that. Let's select only the top and bottom loops with Alt and left click, Alt Shift and left click right here. And let's bevel those again. This is going to be how thick our handles are. I think that looks pretty good. And let's select some of the faces on the side now. So let's press 1 to look from the front. We can select this and that one. And if we press 3 to look from the side, you can see that they're not in the very center, so I'll also select this one and that one right here. And then I'll I to inset. I don't want these to be nearly as wide, so I'll press S to scale, and then Y, scale them in just a little bit. And it looks a little weird, so I'll pull them out a little like that. There are a few ways to make this handle also, and one way would be to use the spin tool for this. If you wanted to do that with both of these selected, you can just press Shift S and move the cursor to the selected faces. You can see it snapped there right in the middle. So then if we switch this to the spin tool and select these top 2 faces right here, let's change the axis to Y so it's going in the right direction. And then we can start moving this like that. Let's open this up and just change that to negative 180 degrees. You can see that'll loop around perfectly, and we would just have to bridge the faces in between. I don't think we need this many steps either, so let's turn that down just a little bit. Go back to the selection tool, select these 2 faces right here, and also these 2 on the inside, right click, bridge faces, and that will be a pretty clean handle for you. I don't use the spin tool a lot, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'll press Ctrl Z to go back and Shift S and move the cursor back to the world origin. Let's select these top two faces right here and the bottom faces, and I'll extrude these out just a little bit. Now I'll select only the top two faces right here and I'll shear them. You can either use the tool right here or Alt, Control, Shift, and S, and then press 1. And if it's going in the wrong direction, just press negative, the minus button. We can do the same thing down here. Control, Alt, Shift, S, 1. Now we can bridge all of these faces right here. So select all of them, right click, bridge faces like that. And let's throw a subdivision surface modifier on this to see how it looks. So with this selected in object mode, we can click this wrench icon right here, add a subdivision surface modifier, and you can see it'll smooth the handle out quite a bit. One problem is that the top is an n-gon, so it ends up making kind of a weird shape right here, but we can clean that up really easily by tabbing into edit mode. In face select mode, we can just select this top face right here. Make sure you have your N side panel open, go to item, and we can just turn the mean crease all the way up. And I'll do this not in X-ray mode, so you can actually see what's happening. You can see that will sharpen that face right there. We can't really see the bottom, so it's not really a problem, but if we move it up to look at it, you might notice some weird shapes going on down here too. So if you want, you can tab into edit mode and make that sharp as well. Now we can right click this, shade auto smooth, and let's turn the viewport levels up to 2, and the render and the viewport levels are the same now. Let's name it mug with F2, and we can move it into place with G and Control. I'll place it right on the plate right there. Shift D to duplicate. Hold Control while you're moving it and snap it to the other plate. And let's just rotate this around with R and Z. Let's make a vase and a flower for the table now. And for this, I'll actually start with a cube instead of a cylinder, and I'll show you why. So Shift A, add in a cube. Let's tab into edit mode. G, Z, 1, so the origin point's at the bottom. Tab back into object mode, G and Control to snap it to the table, and let's just scale that down quite a bit. And a shortcut to add a subdivision surface modifier is with Control and 1, and that will add one with the viewport level set to 1. If you do Control 2, you can see the viewport levels change to 2. So you can do this, I believe, up to 5, but I'll just have it set to 2 right here. Let's Control A to apply the scale and tab into edit mode right here. Let's isolate it so it's easier to see. We can press the slash on the numpad and then look from the front and go into X-ray mode for this and vertex select mode. I want the bottom to be sharp, so let's select the whole bottom right here and we can turn the mean crease all the way up. Now let's just start extruding and scaling and testing things out. I want the bottom to be a little skinnier. Let's select the top, E to extrude, S to scale, so it's wider right here. E to extrude, I'll leave that the same width, E to extrude again, and then I'll scale that out quite a bit. Look from the top, and I to inset, look from the front, and E to extrude down just a little bit, and then down some more. It's nice to have this supporting loop right here, because if you don't have it, then you can see it gets very round. Actually, let's select the bottom right here and turn the mean crease all the way down. And instead of using this option, let's just inset the bottom so that it has a slight curve to it. And now it's not completely sharp. Press slash on the number pad to bring everything back. Let's right click this and shade smooth. Now that we're done with the vase, let's snap it back to the beginning with Alt and G, because I want to use this for reference when we make our flower. Let's start the flower with a cylinder, so Shift A, add in a cylinder, and let's just scale this down in object mode until it's about the width that we want for the flower stem. Control A, apply the scale, and let's bring this down just a little bit so it's inside, and we can tab into edit mode, period to zoom in on it. Let's go into face select mode and select this top face right here. Let's just pull this face up like this to make it a little taller. Control R to add a loop cut, and we can use the scroll wheel to add more loops. Left click and then right click to place them in the middle. Now let's select the top face again. So face select mode, select this. E and then S. So we extrude it and then scale it out just a little bit. E to extrude. So with the top face selected, let's go into edge select mode and Alt, Shift, and left click this loop right here. And then we can bevel the top and the bottom loops with Control B, make this a little more round like that. Eventually we will make this curve, but it's easier to model it straight up for now. The top looks a little small actually, so let's just select the top face and we can expand the selection with Control and plus on the number pad. And let's just S to scale this up and bring it up a little bit. Let's tab back into object mode and we're going to make the pedals a separate object. Shift A to add in a plane, tab into edit mode, and I'll press G, Y, 1. So in object mode, when we scale it, it'll scale from this side right here. So we can scale that down just a little bit and bring that up. So this is how long our pedals are going to be. Control A to apply the scale. So in edit mode, let's press S to scale and then X to make it a little more narrow. And we can add a loop cut in the middle with Control R right here, and then just S to scale that out until we think it looks good. And we can add as many loop cuts as we want. So maybe I'll add one more right here, Control R. We can scale it out a little and just make it a little more round. Control R right here. Let's scale the end one down. Let's select everything and press E to extrude it up and tab back into object mode. I think this would look a little better if it was smooth. So let's press Control 1 and see how it looks with the Subdivision surface modifier. It might look a little better if it's thicker. So let's just come in here. The top is still selected, so we can just drag that up and tab back into object mode. Let's turn this up one more and right click and shade smooth. We can do that with this also, right click, shade smooth. And I want to duplicate this around so that there are 5 pedals, but I want it to rotate around a certain point in the very center over here. So we can set that point with the 3D cursor. Let's just select the flower stem, tab into edit mode. We can go into face select this top face right here, and we can move the 3D cursor with Shift S, cursor to selected. We can tab back into object mode, select this pedal right here, and press period to change the pivot point to the 3D cursor. So if we rotate this, R to rotate, and then Z, you can see that it's rotating around that center point now. We can figure out how much we need to rotate it. I'll just do some math in the side right here. That would be 360, and we want 5 pedals, so we would divide that by 5 and then press enter. So 72 degrees is how much we want to rotate each pedal. So let's remember that number and press Control Z. Look from the top with 7, Shift D, and then before pressing anything else, we can press R, Z, 72, and then enter. And then we can press Shift R to repeat that action, and it will just duplicate it the same amount right there. I don't like how there are gaps in between, so let's select all of these, Shift and left click, and we can move all of them towards the center with G, Y, and then Y again. That will make it so they're all moving on local axes, and we can just move them down until there's not as much of a gap. Let's name the stem flower. We can select all of these petals right here, and then select the stem last, and we can join them all into one object with Control J. And when we did that, all of these lost their modifiers, so we can press Control Z to undo that and make sure that the modifiers are applied for all of these. So you can just go through and apply the modifier for each one. And the shortcut for that is Control A, so that's a little faster. We can just select it, Control A, like that. Now let's do that again. Select all of the petals, select the stem last, Control J. Press period to change the pivot point back to medium point right here. And if we want to make our flower curve, we can do that in quite a few ways. So one way is with proportional editing. With the flower selected, tab into edit mode right here. I'll press Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, and we can just select the top part of the flower right here. And if we turn on proportional editing and press R to start rotating it, let's scroll up to make this circle smaller. You can see it's starting to rotate like that. So you can just move it until it's making a shape that you like. Then we can press A to select everything. And let's just move this bottom part right here back to its origin point, and then tab out of edit mode. And you can see now it's rotated pretty nicely. There is another way using a modifier. It doesn't give you as much control, but it is easy for certain things. So let's press Control Z and I'll just show you how that works. So the modifier we want is called Simple Deform right here. And you can see we have an angle amount, and we have an axis, and we have all of these options right here. We change the angle. Obviously, this isn't what we're looking for because it's kind of twisting it in 2 separate directions. What we want is bend right here. You can see now when we change the angle, it's actually doing what we want. And if we want it to bend to the side instead, we can just change the axis to Y. And this is going to bend it based on where the origin point is. So if we move the origin point, it wouldn't work exactly the same way, but in this case, it works pretty well for us. When you like how it looks, you can apply it like that and then tab into edit mode and do whatever you want. Or if you prefer, you don't have to apply it at all, and you can always come back and tweak it later. I want to be able to move our vase and our flower together. So let's actually parent the flower to the vase right here. So we can select our flower, then Shift left click the vase, Control P to parent to object. Now when we move the vase, it will follow. And we can zoom out and G and Control to snap that to the table right here. Let's press R and Z to rotate it so it's facing out a little bit more. A lot of restaurants and cafes have these vents that go on the top or on the side of the building. I have a reference of one right here, and I'll just drag it into Blender like that. Alt-G, Alt-R, R and X, rotate that 90 degrees, and I can just scale that down quite a bit. Again, I'm not going to model directly on top of this, but I'll use it as a reference while I'm modeling. Let's start with a cylinder, so Shift-A, add in a cylinder, tab into edit mode, G, Z, 1, and if you still have proportional editing turned on, you can just turn that off up here. Tab into object mode, and let's scale that down quite a bit. Control-A to apply the scale. Let's tab back into edit mode now. Let's select this top face right here and bring this down. Let's look from the front with 1, E to extrude. Let's bring this out a little with S. Extrude that up. Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode. Can look from the top. I to inset. E to extrude it down. I to inset. E to extrude up. And E to extrude up a little bit more. I want a base at the bottom like this, but I'll leave it cylindrical just to make it a little easier. We can press Ctrl-R to add a loop cut right here, and right click so that it stays in the center. Let's go into face select mode and select this ring going around. We can do that with Alt and left click. And we can press E to extrude and then S to scale before pressing anything else, and that will push it all the way out. If you have some other more complex shape, you could use Alt E and extrude faces along normals, and that will work also. So we can just extrude that out. Now let's bevel some of these so they're a little smoother. Press 2 to go into edge select mode, Alt and left click to select this loop, Alt Shift and left click to select that other one also, and Control B to bevel. Let's add maybe 3 loops, the scroll wheel. We can select the top face right here and bevel that also so it's smooth. Let's add a small lip right here, so we can do that with Control R. 3 for face select, Alt and left click to select the loop, and then Alt E and extrude faces along normals. Go into edge select and Alt Shift and left click to select the top and bottom right here. Let's Control B to bevel, and I want this to be completely smooth. So if yours is overlapping, press C and that will clamp it. And then with all of this still selected, let's press M to merge by distance to get rid of any overlapping vertices. And if we want, we can bevel this one right here too with Control B. And this loop right here is bothering me for some reason, so I'm going to select that with Alt and left click. And instead of pressing X and just deleting it, we have these other options. And dissolving is like deleting points without actually creating any holes. So let's dissolve this edge right here. You can see now it's gone, but we didn't actually create any holes. If we were to delete the edge right here, then we'd end up with this weird hole like that. So dissolving is the way to go. You can also do that with Control X. So let's tab back into object mode, right click, shade auto smooth, G and Control to snap it to the top right here. And this is huge right now, so let's scale this down a little bit. Control A to apply the scale. And we're done with this reference, so we can delete it now with X. And I want to make something a little more organic, so let's make an apple. And for this, I have a reference also, and I am actually going to model directly on top of this, so let's drag it into Blender right here. Alt-G, Alt-R, R, X, 90, rotate that 90 degrees, and let's scale this down. I'll press 1 to look from the front, and let's move this up on the Z axis so that it's sitting on like this 0 line right here. Let's change the opacity of this, so with it selected, you can press this icon right here, Object Data Properties, turn opacity on, and let's just turn it down. You can start with all sorts of shapes for this, but I'm going to start with a cube. And I'll tab into edit mode, G, Z, and 1, and tab back into object mode, and let's just scale this down quite a bit, and Control A to apply the scale. It's completely fine to start with like a cylinder or a sphere if you want, but for this I'm actually going to use the Subdivision surface modifier, so let's press Control and 2. You can see if we go over to the wrench, we have the modifier right here, and let's tab into edit mode. And this is a little weird because right now we're editing a box that's just getting smoothed out. But you can see as we add loop cuts with Control R and scale it out, we can start to match the shape that we're actually seeing right here, this round cube, to the picture of our apple. And to make this easier for us, we're going to model this symmetrically. Press Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode, and with the loop still selected, let's just scale that out a little bit. Let's select this whole bottom loop right here and scale that in. And we can just keep adding loops with Control R and move them to wherever we need them to be, until we get a shape that's pretty similar. Let's select the top loop and drag that up. Control R to add one in the middle and scale that out. It looks like it could be a little tighter at the bottom, so let's Alt-Z and select the bottom face. You can press 3 to go into face select mode. I to inset like that. Let's make that pretty small, and then G and Z to bring it up. like that. It's starting to look pretty good. We can do the same thing for the top. So face select mode again, I to inset, make that pretty small, and then G and Z to bring it down. Let's look from the front and make sure the shape is still pretty good. If you think this needs to be rounder, you can add more loop cuts or you can scale some of these in. Let's select this top face right here and inset it a little for the stem, drag it down a little. And then I'm going to hold Control and right click, and I'm going to start extruding it upward in the same direction that the stem is over here. I want the top to be pretty flat, so let's inset that with I, and I'm going to use proportional editing. So let's turn that on up here. Let's change the profile to sharp. Let's press S to scale that up. You can see the area of influence is way too big, so let's scroll up to make it smaller like that. And we can use this to make it a little thicker at the end. If you want it to be more sharp down here, you can go into X-ray mode with Alt-Z, edge select. We can select this bottom loop right here with Alt and left click, and we can turn the mean crease all the way up. And when I do that, it'll sharpen that up quite a bit. I'll turn proportional editing off now, select this top face, and I think I scaled it in a little too much, so let's just scale that up a little bit to make it a little sharper. Let's right click this and shade it smooth, and we can delete our reference photo now with X. If you want it to look a little more lumpy and random, you can totally do that. I would just apply this right here and then tab into edit mode. And now you can edit all of these points individually if you'd like. This would also be easy with proportional editing, so we can just turn that back on. I'll change this back to smooth right here. We can go into vertex select mode and just select some points around the edge right here, G and Z. You can scroll up and down like that. And we can do the same thing for the bottom. So let's select some around the edge. It's okay if it's a little random because apples are not, actually perfectly symmetrical. Let's just pull these down a little. I think that looks good. Before going any further, let's make sure it's the size that we want. So I'll select it, G and Control to put it somewhere close. It looks really big, so let's scale it down just a little. Let's Control A and apply the scale. And let's make some little boxes to put the apples in. So Shift A. Let's add in a cube right here, tab into edit mode, G, Z, and 1, tab back into object mode and S to scale. We'll scale this down quite a bit. And let's just make the shape of the box that we want. So S and Z, S, Y, scale it out a little over here. So let's apply that with Control A and apply the scale. Tab into edit mode, and I'm actually going to select the top face and just delete it. So X, delete faces right there. So right now it's hollow, and I'll fix it later, but this is just going to make some things easier to model. I want to make some holes to grab onto, so I'll press Control R to add in a loop cut right here, and we'll bevel that with Control B. Again, I'll scroll down so we only have 2. This is going to be how wide our holes are. Control R to add another loop cut, Control B to bevel that. This is going to be how wide they are. Now let's go into X-ray mode, face select mode, and let's select these faces right here. And because we're in X-ray mode, it's selecting it on both sides. Let's delete those faces with X, delete the faces. Let's go into vertex select right here. I want these to be round, so I'll select all of these points and Control Shift B to bevel the vertices. You can also do that with Control B, and then you have to press V like that, and it will do the same thing. I want these to be completely round, so I'll just make them really big like this. And again, you can hit C so they don't overlap. And I'll use the scroll wheel to make these a little more round. Let's merge some of the points that are on top of each other. So with this all still selected, press M and merge by distance. You can see we've got rid of 4 points. Now we can press A to select everything and Alt-E and extrude faces along normals. I was planning on adding the thickness on the inside so we can go in the opposite direction like this, but I want these to be parallel. So let's open up this menu right here, turn on offset even, and you might have noticed that now it's dark on top instead of light. That's because our normals are flipped inside out. Our model is basically inside out right now. And in a lot of situations, this isn't really going to cause problems, but sometimes it can when you go to render things. The shading might not look right. So there is an option right here called flip normals, and you can see the lighting will kind of change now. Another way to check to see if your models are inside out is in the overlays option up here. You can turn on face orientation, and if it's red, that means it's inside out. So it looks like no matter what we do, some parts are inside out. So there is another option. You can just select everything and press Alt-N to recalculate the normals right here. So we can recalculate the outside, and now everything will be blue. And we can turn this off when we're done with it. Let's right click that and shade auto smooth, and that will smooth out the handles right here. So let's bring this over here. We'll put it at like the corner of the shop. I want there to be a few of these stacked here, so let's give it a name real quick with F2. I'll just call it Apple Box. Let's duplicate with Shift D. We can press Z to bring it up, and we can snap it to the top of the other one with Control again, because we have face snapping turned on right here. Then we can press Shift R to repeat that. We can press R and Z to rotate these on the Z axis. From a distance, we won't be able to easily see inside the bottom two, so I'm only going to put apples in the top one. We can select the apple, press G and Control to snap it to the inside right here. And let's bring that up a little higher so it looks like they're kind of overflowing. And I'll press 7 to look from the top, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it across. Now I'll Shift and left click to select both of them, and Shift D to duplicate. So we have about 6 in here. Now let's select all of these, and I want these to be rotated a little more randomly, so we can do that pretty easily. I talked about that in the last video. We can press F3 and search for randomize. We're looking for randomize transform right here, and that'll bring up this menu, and we can randomize the rotation per object. So if we want, we can just select all of these right here, just start moving them around. And right now they're all rotating from the bottom, which makes sense. That's where the origin points are, but it means that they're kind of shifting around. If we want to reset the origins to the middle, with them still selected, we can right click, set origin, and we can do origin to center of mass volume right here. And again, let's F3, search for randomize transform, and now they won't move around as much. So let's just move this a little, make it a little more random. And let's select these two, Shift D to duplicate, move them up on the Z axis. I'll look from the top, and I'll shift them over like this. So we have kind of a stack going. We have our crate from the beginning that's hidden right now, so we can show that with Alt and H, and you can see it's really huge. So let's scale that down with S, and we can move that with G and Shift Z like that. We can move that over. And let's add a second one with Shift D, move that up on the Z axis, and we can snap it to the top with Control, and let's rotate that around. Next, let's put an espresso machine for making coffee inside the cafe. And I went to Google Images to find a reference for that also. So let's just click and drag that in, go back to Blender, Alt G, Alt R, R, X, 90, S to scale. We're not going to model directly on top of this one. I want to make another counter in the corner to put this on, so we can do that really quickly with Shift A, add in a cube, tab into edit mode, G, Z, and 1, move it up by 1 meter, tab back into object mode, and let's scale this down quite a bit, and G and Control to snap it in there. Let's hit 3 to look from the side, and Alt Z, and we can kind of see the thickness of the wall right here, so we can just drag this into place where we want it. Let's make this the same height as the other counter, so we can look from the front, S and Z right here. Let's make it a little wider with S and X, and apply the scale when you're done with Control A. I'll look from the front again, tab into edit mode. Let's go into wireframe for this so that we can see how wide the counter is right here. Control R to add a loop cut, and let's put that around the same distance right here. Go back into solid view. Let's go into face select, and we can select this front face and extrude that out a little bit. So let's get started on the espresso machine. For this, I think we'll start with a cube again. So Shift A, add in a cube. Let's tab into edit mode, G, Z, 1, tab back into object mode and scale this down. Control A to apply the scale. And let's go back into edit mode, S to scale, and Y so that's only on the Y axis. We can add some loop cuts for this part and this part at the top. Let's press Control R and then bevel this with Control B. Let's scroll down because I only want 2 loops. We can go into face select mode, select the top and the bottom face right here, and E to extrude both of those outward. So it looks like the bottom is extruding quite a bit more, so we can just select the bottom face and pull that out a little. If you want this top lip right here, we can do that with another loop cut. So Control R. Let's bevel with Control B. Let's add another loop at the back with Control R. 3 for face select. And let's just select some of these faces right here at the top, and we can press E to extrude that upward. But let's select this bottom face right here, and I'll press I to inset just a little bit, and E to extrude it down. Sometimes it's easier to model things when they're not connected, so what we can do with this face selected is Shift D to duplicate it. So let's just bring this down a little bit, then S and X to scale it on the X axis, and I want this to be close to a square, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Let's right click and subdivide this a few times. I'll open up this menu, and I think I'll subdivide it 3 times. And this is when Loop Tools comes in handy. With this still selected, we can right click, and under Loop Tools, we can choose Circle, and this will turn it into a circle for us. And we can press G and Z and hold Control to snap it to this surface right here. And now let's model one of these things. I don't know what they're called, but it's the part that holds the coffee. E to extrude it downward, E to extrude again, and we'll scale this down quite a bit. And then I want the spout at the bottom, so E to extrude again, E to extrude, and then I'll scale that down a little bit like that. It's easier to make one with one spout instead of two like these ones have, so that's the way I'm doing it. We can make a handle by selecting these two faces right here. Let's inset these with I just a little bit and E to extrude, but I don't want it to go at that angle. I want it to go on the Y axis, so let's press Y, and I want to flatten this. So let's press S to scale and then Y, and you can see as I scale it down, it gets flatter. This is one little trick. You can just scale things down to 0 on one axis and it will flatten on that axis. I want this to be more square shaped and we can do that pretty easily. Just select one of the edges and press S to scale, X, and as we scale it down, it will get flatter. We can just scale it to 0 like that. We can do the same thing for the other edge. So S, X, 0. We can select these front two faces and extrude it out a little bit like that. Let's add another loop cut right here and we can make the end of the handle a little thicker. So let's select these two faces and Control plus to expand the selection. And we can make this thicker again with the shrink or fatten tool or the shortcut Alt S like that. We can make it a little thicker. So I know this is detached and we can just hover over it and press L and it will select this whole separated object. So let's look from the front, move it to the side a little bit and Shift D to duplicate. And we can press X to move it on the X axis to the other side. Let's make a grate for the bottom right here. We can just select this face and Shift D to duplicate. Move it up on the Z axis just a little bit right there. And let's add some loop cuts with Control R and I'll scroll up to add more and I'll left click and then right click to place them all in the center. Switch to face select mode and we can just select all of these faces. So select this one right here and then Control and left click to select all the ones in between. I to inset and then I again to inset individual. X, delete the faces. Again, I know it's detached, so I can select it all with L and then E to extrude up just a little bit. We can add some dials at the top the same way that we made these parts. So I'll select this face right here, Shift D to duplicate, S and then X, and I'll scale this until it's close to being a square. Then let's subdivide this a few times. So right click, subdivide. Let's subdivide this 3 times. Now right click again, loop tools, turn that into a circle. We can scale that down. Let's drag this over here. Let's press E to extrude, E again, and then scale that down a little bit. Let's duplicate this around a little bit. So to select the whole thing, again, hover over it and press L. Let's look from the front, Shift D and X to move it on the X axis. And again, Shift D, X, and we'll make it asymmetrical. So it's 2 and then 3 like that. That's how this one is. We can make some steam ones if we want to. That's what these pipes are. So again, I'll select this bottom face, Shift D to duplicate, and I'll scale that on the X axis until it's close to being a square. Scale that down quite a bit more. And I'll just put 1 on this side right here. And I'll look from the side with 3 and go into X-ray mode. And I'll control and right click to get some interesting angles as we extrude it. Back in object mode, let's right click this and shade auto smooth. So with this selected, we can move towards our counter, press G and Control to snap it over there. And we're done with this reference, so we can delete it now with X. Let's model the last object now, and this is going to be a bicycle. This is going to be a lot easier with a reference, so I recommend you go on Google Images or Pinterest or something like that and find a picture of a bike from the side. I'll just drag and drop that in here. Alt-G, Alt-R, RX90, and I want to spin this around the other way, so RZ and 180. We can scale this down a little bit, and let's drag this up so the wheels are close to the 0 line. I am going to model on top of this, so with this selected, let's go to Object Data Properties and turn on Opacity and just turn this down pretty low. And there are a lot of different ways to approach this, but we're just going to start with a cube. So Shift A, add in a cube, Alt Z for X-ray mode, and we can tab into edit mode, and with everything selected, let's scale this down. And again, I'm in edit mode for this, so when I move this around, the origin point is going to stay at the bottom. Scale this down until the thickness looks pretty close. I'm actually going to make it a little thicker than it is right here, just because I think it'll suit the cartoony style a little better. Let's rotate this cube with R, and if we want, we can just select the top face and drag it up like that, but we can also change the orientation up here to normal, and that will make it so that the angles on the side don't change at all. So let's just drag that up on the local Z axis like that, and we can select this one and drag it down to about here. And at the end, I'll show you how we can smooth this all out with a subdivision surface modifier. Let's add some loop cuts with Control R, and I'll add another one at the top right here. Again, Control R, and Control R for one at the bottom like this. Let's select everything with A and Shift D to duplicate, and we can move this across for this bar over here. With Alt and left click, let's select some of these loops right here and Control X, and that will dissolve them. We can kind of start fresh. We can leave the top right there for the handlebars, but for this one, let's move that up. Again, on the local Z axis, we'll move that to about right here. Then we can add a loop cut at the bottom, add another loop cut right here for this bar, loop cut for this bar right here, and for the top of that bar. So if you look for pictures of bikes from other angles, you'll see that this part right here branches off into kind of a fork shape that goes around the wheel. So for that, we can just extrude right here, and then we can select this bottom face right here and press 1 to look from the front, and we can E to extrude that down and E to extrude again for this part right here. Let's just move that up with G and rotate with R, and we can scale that down just a little bit. We only have to make one side right now because eventually we are going to mirror it so that it will be symmetrical. Let's create these crossbars, and to do that, all we have to do is select the face on either side that we made with these loop cuts. So shift and left click like that, and then right click and bridge faces. We can do the same thing right here for this bar. Select both of those, right click and bridge faces. These bars right here are also going to branch off kind of like this to the side. So we can do the same thing where we select this face right here and extrude it outward. We can do that right here also. And let's select this face right here, press 1 to look from the front, and we can extrude this out and press G to move it down over here. Let's rotate with R, and I'll scale that down just a little bit. Let's create a loop cut with Control R. Can bring that down to about right here. I'll go into face select mode, select this face right here, shift and left click right here, right click and bridge faces. So tab back into object mode, and let's mirror this now. We can add a mirror modifier over here with this wrench icon and select mirror. And we don't want it to mirror on the X axis, so we can turn that off and turn on Y, and you can see it's mirroring now. Let's add a subdivision surface modifier to smooth this out, and we'll see how it looks. So we can press Control 2, and you can see it's quite a bit smoother, but there are some things wrong with it. Let's select this image and move it back so we can see a little more clearly. You can see we have some weird overlapping issues. The overlapping is pretty obvious. You can see we just have two meshes going into each other right here. So we can fix that by bisecting. You can bisect it on the Y axis. Basically what that's going to do is delete half of the object, but it looks like it's deleting the wrong half. So we also have this flip option right here. And if we check that, now it doesn't seem nearly as broken. Here's what it looks with bisecting. Here's what it looks like without it. To clean this up, we can tab back into edit mode and look from the front, and Alt Z to go into X-ray mode. And let's add some loop cuts with Control R. I'll left click and we can slide it down pretty close right here. Overlapping points can cause some issues, so don't slide it all the way. Make sure there's a little space like that. And you can see it's tightening up quite a bit right here. We can add some more on this center bar, and we can just put supporting loops like this wherever we think we need them. Let's add another one right here. Basically at every intersection where two bars meet, this is going to make it look a lot neater. Let's add another one right here. Control R, left click, and slide. Let's add one at the top right here. Control R to add some loop cuts. If you want to do this in a really lazy way, you can just Control R and then scroll up a lot, but I don't think we really need this many points, so I advise against that. Let's select this top face right here, and we can I to inset. Let's just extrude it up to right about here, and then I'll I to inset again. If we want this to be sharper, we can either add a supporting loop like that, or we can select this edge right here with Alt and left click, N to open up the side panel, and turn up mean crease. And that, as you can see, will sharpen it quite a bit. We can do the same thing for the handlebars over here. So let's go into face select mode. We can select this top face and we can move it down just a little bit. I to inset. Let's turn the mean crease up and we can extrude it. Let's turn this mean crease back down so it's smooth at the top. Let's change this orientation back to global, and we can add a loop cut with Control R at the top right here. Go into face select mode and select this front face, and E to extrude, but I want this to go straight out, so let's press X like that. We can put that right about here, and let's press S, X, and then 0, and that will flatten it on the X axis right there. Let's add another loop cut so we can make the handlebars branch off. And I'll flatten this too with S, X, and 0. Let's go into face select mode and select this one right here. So let's look from the top with 7. And I'm just going to press E to extrude. And so I'll make them come out a little bit. I'll rotate with R. Let's press Control and right click to make this a little smoother. but it looks a little flat compared to our reference, so we can select some of this. With the end selected, I'll just press Ctrl+ to expand the selection right here. We can drag this part up. Let's also select the end right here and bring that out just a little bit more, and I'll inset that with I. Let's make some grips for the handlebars. So with the end face selected, let's press Ctrl+ to expand the selection right here, and I'll press Alt-E and extrude faces along normals, and this will push it outward. Let's go to edge select mode and Alt and left click to select this loop right here, and we can turn the mean crease up to sharpen it. And let's add a loop cut with Ctrl-R to tighten this up a little bit. Let's make the pedals, and for this we're going to leave it symmetrical at first and we'll fix it later. So go into face select mode, select this right here, and I to inset. Let's turn the mean crease up because I want these to be sharp coming out. And we can E to extrude like that. And I'll turn the mean crease back down. Let's add a loop cut right here with Ctrl-R. And for this part, I'll change the orientation back to normals, go into face select mode, and I'll select this bottom face right here and look from the front. So I'm going to look at the shape of this, but I'm not going to do it at the same angle because it's easier to just continue at the angle of the normals. So E to extrude, down maybe about this far right here. Let's add a loop cut with Ctrl-R, select this face, I to inset, E to extrude just a little bit, and we can scale this on the x-axis. And because we're using the normals, it's still going to go at an angle like this, which is nice. E to extrude again, E to extrude a little more, S, and it looks like it's the y-axis that we need to scale this down on. Now this looks a little too round, so with this still selected, let's press Ctrl-X to expand the selection a little further, and we can turn the mean crease up to make it look a little boxier. If you turn it up all the way, it'll be completely sharp, so I think I'll set it to 0.5. In object mode, let's give this a name with F2, and I'll just name it bike. And if you think you might want to edit this later, you can duplicate it with Shift-D like this, and then find it in your outliner. We have a lot of things right now, so you can just hover over here and press period, and it will show you what's selected right here. And we can just hide this. So if we mess this up, we can always come back to a previous version of it. I'd like to make it so that the pedals on the other side aren't sticking in the same direction. And to do that, we have to apply the mirror modifier. So we can come over here and choose apply like that. And then when we tab into edit mode, we can edit both sides. And because it was bisected, it added this edge along the center for us. Let's select the loop going all the way around with Alt and left click. And you can see it's selecting it going all the way around, except for on the inside. So we can dissolve this with X and choose dissolve edges right here. Let's select this one on the inside. And again, the shortcut for dissolving is Ctrl-X. So now it's not as square in the center. I want to rotate one of the pedals around this point right here. So let's move our 3D cursor there. In edge select mode, we can press Alt and left click, then Shift S and move the cursor to the selected right there. With this still selected, let's right click and choose edge split. I'll deselect everything with Alt A, and if we hover over this and press L, we can move it with G. You can see now that it's completely detached. That's what splitting the edges did. Let's press Ctrl Z to move this back, and I'll change this from normal back to global, and we can pivot around the 3D cursor by pressing period and changing this to 3D cursor. You can also change that up here. Now, if we rotate this on the y-axis, you can see that it'll rotate around the point that we actually want. And we just want to flip this 180 degrees, so we can press R, Y, and then type in 180, and then press enter. Press A to select everything, and I want to merge this back together, so I'll press M and merge by distance. And now these points right here are connected again. Let's start with the seat. We can make that with a cube. So Shift A, mesh, cube, tab into edit mode, and then S to scale down like that. I'll look from the front. I'll press Alt Z to go into X-ray mode, and we can just move that up to where the seat is right here. I'll press period to change the pivot point back to median, and I'll just select these points and kind of move them to where the seat is. You can press Ctrl R to add some loop cuts right here. I'll add one more right here. Move that down a little. Maybe let's move it up here and add one more right about there. Let's tab back into object mode and press Ctrl 2, and that's going to add a subdivision surface modifier. And we can tab back into edit mode and move this to match it just a little more. So this looks good from this angle, but let's look at it from the top right here. Oh, and it looks like this isn't actually lined up properly. That's because our 3D cursor isn't in the center of the world. So let's move it back there. Shift S, cursor to world origin, and then we can select our seat, right click. Let's set the origin to center of mass right here and press Alt G. So now it will be in the center there. We can press 1, and line that back up. And now it's actually in the center where we want. So we can press 7 to look from the top and tab back into edit mode. And I know the front right here is going to be quite a bit skinnier. So I'll select it, hit S and then Y, scale that on the Y axis right about here. Let's select the back part right here, press S and Y to scale that in. Let's select this loop with Alt and left click. S and Y. And if we want to make the bottom look a little more hollow, we can just go into face select mode, select some of these bottom faces, I to inset. If they're individual like that, press I again, and make sure you don't have any points overlapping by going too far. So we can bring that in a little bit, E to extrude, and just move that up a little bit like that. And let's join this with our bike. So select the seat, shift select the bike, and press Ctrl J. And now this is one object. So for the wheels, let's start with a circle, Shift A, mesh, circle right here. And I think 32 vertices is okay for this one. We want it to be pretty round. Let's tab into edit mode, R, X, and 90 to spin it around. Back into object mode because I want our origin point to stay in the center of the circle right here. Let's just move this to the center of the wheel on our reference like that. And then we can press S to scale it down. I'm going to match this with the outside of the tire, which is also up against this 0 line right here. Let's apply the scale with Control A, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate this because I'm going to use it for the spokes in the center. So right click to leave that in place, and we can tab into edit mode. We'll go into vertex select right here, and with everything selected, E and then S to scale it down. And this is going to be the thickness of the tire. Press A to select everything, and let's move this on the Y axis so it's kind of up against this bar right here, and then we can extrude it like that. And it looks like this might be inside out. So let's go to overlays and turn on face orientation. And yeah, it is inside out. So let's select everything with A, Alt N, and we can recalculate outside, and that fixed it for us. I want to make sure the origin point is in the very center. So let's tab back into object mode, right click, set origin to center of mass volume like that. And then this Y value right here, we can just set that to 0, and that should make it so that it's completely centered. Let's smooth this out with Control 2. That will add the subdivision surface modifier. Let's select this other circle that we duplicated, and I'll tab into edit mode and look from the side. Let's just scale this down a little bit. I'll turn on X-ray mode, and I'll put it right about here. E to extrude, S to scale, and I'll press 0, and that will scale everything to the center. And I want to merge all of these points into one single point so they're not overlapping. I can press M and merge by distance. You can see we removed a bunch of vertices. So there are a few ways you can do this. If you want, you can select everything and then I to inset, I again to inset individual, then X and delete the faces like that. But I'll press Control Z and I'll show you that we can also use a modifier called the wireframe modifier. And basically what it does is deletes all of the faces and thickens the edges a little bit. We can change the thickness over here. I'll set this to something like 0.005 so it's pretty thin. And when it looks good, let's just apply it like that. Let's see if it looks okay when we join it to our tire right here. So I'll select the spokes, shift select the tire, and Control J. This looks a little weird with the subdivision surface, so I'll press Control Z, and instead I'll just parent it to the tire with Control P, and set parents to object like that. Now when we move this around, the spokes should follow. Let's select the tire and the spokes and press Shift D and then X. We can duplicate it and move it to the other side. Let's select all of those and then select the bike last and Control P, and we'll parent it to the object, but we'll choose Keep Transform. Otherwise some parts will snap around. So Control P, object Keep Transform. Let's make this gear and the chain. We can do that again with a circle. So Shift A, add in a circle right here, tab into edit mode, RX90, back into object mode. Let's just move this to this point right here, and S to scale it down to match like the outside diameter. Control A, apply the scale, tab into edit mode, and I'm in vertex select for this. E to extrude, S to scale, and I'll go to this outer edge right here where the holes are. E to extrude, S to scale, right about here, and then E to extrude, S to scale, and then 0. And then we'll merge them with M and merge by distance. Let's go into face select mode right here, Alt and left click to select this inner loop right here, and we can do a cool selection trick. Go up to the select menu right here and choose check or deselect. You can see now that it deselected half of them right here, and we can use the options down in the corner to make the selection match our reference a little closer. And I'll just move this around until I think it looks good. I set deselect to 2 and select it to 4. It's not completely symmetrical, but that's okay. With these selected, I'll press X and delete just the faces like that. Then I'll select everything and E to extrude just a little bit. Let's go back into object mode now and just move this over so that it's a little closer to our pedal. right here. And we can make the chain pretty easily. For that, we'll just use another circle. So Shift A, add in a circle. In edit mode, R, X, and 90. Back in object mode, we can move this to the other circle and scale that down with S. Apply the scale with Control A. Then I'll tab into edit mode, press 1 for vertex select, and I'll select half of these right here. And I'll just bring this over to the center of the other wheel. And I'll press S to scale it down. This isn't going to be completely accurate, but I think it looks good enough. Let's go back into object mode now, and I'll press G and Y, and I'll hold Control, and we can snap it to this gear right here. Go back into edit mode, then let's select this back half right here, and we'll pull this in at an angle. A to select everything, E and then Y to extrude it on the Y axis just a little bit right there. Select everything again, Alt E, and extrude faces along normals, and just push it out a little bit. That will add some thickness. Let's go back to this gear right here. And in face select mode, let's hold Alt and left click to select this whole outer ring right here. And let's inset all of these with I. Make sure that they're set to individual by hitting I again. Just move them in just a little bit right here. And let's press Alt E and extrude faces along normals like that. And this is going to push it out kind of like a gear right here. And if we want them to be more spiky, we can do that by changing this up here to the normals. And I'll also press period and change this to individual origins. S to scale, and then Y, and we can scale that in like that. And when you're done, just make sure that you change all of these back. So I'll set this to global, I'll press period, and I'll change this back to median point. Let's make sure nothing is inside out. So let's go to the overlays, turn on face orientation, and it looks like some of this is inside out. So I'll select everything in here, Alt N, and recalculate outside. We can turn that off. Tab back into object mode, and let's make sure that both of these, let's make sure that this gear and the chain are parented to the bike. So select those, shift select the bike, and Control P, parent to object. I think we're finally done, so we can select this now and delete it. Let's select our bike and then select everything else, right click and shade auto smooth. And we can arrange our final scene now. So I know that I'm going to want a ground plane, so we can press Shift A to add in a plane right here, and I'll just scale that up really big for now. Let's set up our camera so we can go back to the outliner up here, turn on this first collection that has our camera and our light, and we can press 0 to look through the camera, and then in the N side panel, go to View and lock the camera to View right here. And now when we move around, you can see that the camera is actually following. So we can just line this up until it's a good angle for us. Another cool thing you can do with a camera is change the focal length. So if you select your camera and you go to Object Data Properties down here, it should be a little camera button now. You have the focal length right here. So if you want to simulate a wide angle lens, you can make this a lot smaller. And if you want this to look more miniature, then you can make this a lot bigger, like around 100. And if you want it to have no perspective at all, you can change this to orthographic. Just know that when you do this, scrolling will no longer zoom in. You have to change this scale right here. I do actually like how it looks in orthographic mode. So let's just arrange this. I think this is a pretty good angle. Let's just make sure that this is zoomed in as far as we want. And when you have it where you want it, you can turn off lock camera to view right here so that when you move around, the camera doesn't move anymore. Now is a good time to move everything around if you don't like how it's positioned. So I'll select this plane and I'll scale it up even more so that we can't see the edge of it. I'll rotate some of these crates around. Let's select the bike, press G to move it and Control to snap it to the ground. And we'll make it lean against these crates right here. So R and Z to rotate it a little bit like that. We can look from the top too and just move it around like that. And if you want it to actually lean, then you can press R and then X twice to rotate it on the local X axis, and you can just rotate it a little bit like that. Make sure you're looking through your camera occasionally to see how everything lines up. I'm gonna move the stool over a little bit over here, both of these. Let's rotate this a little. We'll add some simple lighting and materials. And for that, we can go into render view right here. I'm going to show everything in the Cycles render engine, but if you want, you can use EV2. And I'm going to set the device to GPU. If yours is grayed out, you might have to change some settings. So I'll go to Edit, Preferences, and under System, I'm going to set this to Optics. So let's select our default light right here. And now we can move this around to wherever we want it. With that selected, I'll go to Object Data Properties. It should look like a light bulb now. And instead of using a point, I'll change this to area, and I'll reset the rotation with Alt-R, and I'll move it to the other side right here because I want the light to come from this angle. And then I'll scale that up with S. You can see as I do this, the shadows should become quite a bit softer. And this works the same way in EV as well. If you want to change the brightness, you can also do that under Object Data Properties by just changing the power right here. With the light selected, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and then you can move it to the other side as well. And make sure to keep checking through your camera. Let's start adding some materials. So I'll start by selecting this ground plane right here. We can go to the material tab. We can press new to add a new one. And most of these, I'm just going to be changing the base color. So I want the ground to be pretty blue. And when you do this, you might notice that it doesn't seem as bright anymore. So you might have to select your lights. I like to select them in the outliner, and then you can change the power over here. I'll try setting this to 2500. I'm also going to duplicate this light right here and scale it down quite a bit. And I'll bring it down and put it inside of our cafe and bring it in here. And obviously this is way too bright, so let's make this pretty low. I'll just set it to 0 and I'll turn it up just a little bit so the inside is illuminated. I'd like this to be a little warmer so we can change the color. I usually just set it to orange, and then I'll turn the saturation down until it looks good. Let's add materials to the building, so we can select that, go to the material tab, and press the new button. And most of this I want to be kind of an off-white color, so we'll set this to something like that yellow-orange and turn the saturation down a little bit. And if you want multiple colors on one object, you can press the plus button like that, and you can either add a new material or set it to an existing one right here. And if you want to stay organized, it's a good idea to name these. So I'll call this off-white, and I'll select that right here, and then you can duplicate it with this button right there. And I'll just make this a little darker. And now we have to select which part we want to be this color. So you can tab into edit mode. I want this bottom part, this trim, to be darker. So I'll press Alt and left click to select that and expand the selection with Control plus. And you can see now over here, we have some new buttons now that we're in edit mode. One of them is assign. So make sure you have the one selected that you want, and you can press assign, and you can see now that the color changed. So I'll also select the counter, and I'll also select this inner part of the window right here, and we can assign that too. I want the canopy to be red, so I'll select this front face, Control plus to expand the selection, add a new material, click the new button, and I'll change this to red. And with that selected, we'll assign it like this. I'll select the whole roof and Control plus to expand the selection, add a new material, and we can change this to a green color and press assign. And I'll just make this quite a bit darker, and make sure that you're staying organized by giving these names. Let's select this part of the window, expand the selection, and we'll make this green also. I'll select the part that's supposed to be glass. We'll add a new slot, new, click assign, and we'll make this really light blue. So I'll select the table and the stools. I'll press new to add a new one, and we'll make this brown, kind of like wood. Make it orange, turn the saturation down and the value down a little bit. And to make the material the same for all of these, you can press Control L and link materials. So let's just run through all of our objects now and add the colors that you want. For the carafe, I want them to be metallic, so we can add a new material. And if you scroll down a little bit, we have this metallic option. You can just turn that all the way up, and you can see now that it's shiny. If you want it to be more or less shiny, you can change the roughness right here. Let's make the lamps metallic also. If you want the coffee to be a different color inside, you can just select the face and then make a new material and make sure you assign it. If this is confusing for you to edit with the modifier still on, you can go over to the modifiers. And when you press this button in edit mode, you can see that the mesh will actually line up properly now. If other objects are getting in the way, you can press slash on the number pad to isolate it temporarily. And when you're done, you can just press slash again. Now that everything has some color, you can look back through your camera with 0 on the number pad and just make sure that the lights look okay to you before rendering it out. And if you want it to be brighter overall, you can also change the world settings right here, where we have the background color and the strength. So right now it's set to gray, but if you wanted, you could change this to something else too, like completely white. You can also change the overall contrast of your scene by going to the render properties right here and scrolling down to the very bottom. And we have color management, and you can change the look right here to change the contrast, or you can mess with the exposure and the gamma. And this works in both EV and cycles. When you're ready to render the final image, you can just go up to render, render image, and then you can save it by going to image, save as, You can change the file type right here, you can change the name of it at the bottom, and you can save it to whatever folder you want. The next step is to keep practicing. Browse Instagram or Pinterest and see if you can recreate things that you like, or come up with a list of objects to challenge yourself. And if you don't remember how to do something, you can come back to this video, check the list of shortcuts I made, or just look it up. I also have regular challenges on Discord to help motivate people. The more you use all of these methods, the easier they'll get. Thanks for watching and have a good one.